Welcome back to another college baseball video. Week 12, top 25 update and field of 64 projection. Already at week 12, season just kind of flew by where we've got two more weeks of regular season college ball before the conference tournaments start up. A few teams have already finished their regular season, so regular season really coming down to an end. If you're a strictly college baseball fan, you don't watch any baseball outside of that. I kind of feel bad for you because it's like beginning of May and your season's already kind of winding down. Obviously, you got 4 weeks of playoffs, conference tournaments, and then 2 rounds of regionals before the World Series. So, I mean, midway through June, your season's over. What do? I do find it kind of interesting that, like, if you look at the college football season, when you account for the playoffs, I think they comes out to 17 games, which compared to NFL is like almost the entire season. But when college baseball, like if you add the playoffs on top of the regular season, it only comes out to half of the MLB season, and that's without counting MLB playoffs. So it's a short season, so you got to cherish it while it lasts. So hopefully you get a baseball fix somewhere else other than college baseball, which is why I also like to cover minor league prospects and MLB draft as well on the website. So, but college baseball is the main focus right now because we are in the heat of it and I've been having fun with it. So, happy to jump right back into top 25 update and then field of 64. So, I'm gonna try to fly through this a little quicker than I did last time. Kind of just talk about what happened over the weekend, talk about some shuffling on my top 25, and then updating the field of 64 projection. So, without further ado, let's jump right into it. UCLA, to no surprise, they stay at the top. They have been in that number one spot all year. Stay undefeated in the Big Ten. I think in my first video, I said that I didn't believe UCLA was going to run the table, and they in the Big Ten. And they are looking like they have a chance to do that now. Looking at the rest of their schedule, they're 24-0 in the Big Ten. They got 6 more conference games left to close out the season. They are at home against Oregon, who Oregon's playing some good ball right now. That's going to probably be their toughest conference series of the year. They did have that series against USC, but I think Oregon might give them a better matchup than USC did. And then they're on the road at Washington to end the season. And I mean, at that point, I don't know if UCLA is going to be playing for much because they might already have the number one seed in the Big Ten locked up as of now. And I don't see them falling out of that number one national seed unless they were to lose both these series. So I mean, it's not like they're in a dire situation to win these games, so they could drop one, I believe. Yeah, so I mean, there's a very real possibility that they finish the season 30-0 in the Big Ten. And then they also went on over the weekend. They went on the road to Michigan State, swept them. Got tested in that last game in a big way. They were down 10-2. It looked like they were going to finally drop that first Big Ten game of the season, but then they come back and beat Michigan State 13-11. So, I mean, kind of like I was talking about Georgia Tech last week. Georgia Tech last week had that big comeback win against Wake Forest. I think that was also a 10-2 game. So UCLA did the same thing, just proving that they could win in every way, shape, and form. And then in the midweek, they beat UC Santa Barbara 15-3, which, if you remember a couple weeks ago, I was really high on UC Santa Barbara because they had beaten UCLA in the midweek. And then UCLA turns around and beats them by 12 runs here. So another undefeated week for UCLA. Nothing changes there. Texas beats Mississippi State, top 25 team at home. Mississippi State came into the series ranked 11th on the top 25. So Texas gets another top 25 series win there. They stay at number 2. North Carolina had a weird week where they only had one. I believe it was a finals week type of thing with them. They lose to Coastal in the midweek at home, 12-2. So a big win for Coastal there. We'll get to them in a second. And then they had a Wednesday game with Queens that was canceled. And then they just played the one game against Duke over the weekend that they won 13-0. So they only played 2 games on the week, but there isn't really anything there for them. There isn't enough there for them to move up or down, just for the fact that they only played 2 games. Georgia Tech goes 3-1 on the week. They stay at number 4. They beat Kennesaw State in the midweek, and then take 2 of 3 from Xavier at home. That Friday game was kind of weird. They dropped to Xavier. Had the lead in the top of the 9th. Xavier tied it, go to extra innings, and then Georgia Tech gets hosed on that home run call where it was a foul ball, but the umpires called it fair. Xavier goes on to win 8-4, I believe. But Georgia Tech stays at 4. Georgia Tech and North Carolina is still kind of interchangeable. North Carolina has the head-to-head over Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech has been more dominant throughout the season, but obviously there's questions with the pitching. I think they were on a streak of 12 games where they gave up a run in the first inning. The bullpen has been excellent for really the whole second half of the season, but the rotation has been a little bit more hit and miss. So it's kind of what's your preference when it comes to North Carolina and Georgia Tech? Georgia Tech's going to win the ACC regular season, and then it'll be a toss-up who wins that ACC tournament because they are very evenly matched. Georgia, they swept their week. They go 4-0, get the series sweep over Missouri at home. They stay put. Auburn moves up to 6 from 7. This was one of my rare cases where a Power 4 team drops despite winning their weekend series. So Oregon State, Oregon State goes 3-2 on the week. They split a 2-game series with UTRGV Tuesday, Wednesday, and then they take 2 of 3 from Cal State Northridge at home. So they go 3-2 on the week against all mid-majors, which typically that wouldn't warrant them dropping, but what Auburn did on the road, they go to Texas A&M, who's been one of the hottest teams in the country throughout the second half of the season, have the best series win in the country when they beat Texas 2 out of 3. And so what Auburn did was too good to deny, so I had to move them up over Oregon State. Oregon State's also in a pretty scary spot now that Dax Whitney is definitely out for the season. It was a torn UCL, and I can't recall if it has been announced whether he's getting the internal brace or the full Tommy John. That's going to be a big talking point of mine for at least the next year, because as of now, well, maybe not as of now, but before the injury, he seemed like the favorite to be the first overall pick in the 2027 draft. Maybe not the favorite in the sense that like Rock Chalowski is right now, but the favorite in the sense that like if 2027 draft happened today, before he went down with the injury, I'd probably put my money on Dax Whitney going first overall. And with the pitching being the strength of that team, like they've got the depth, but at the same time they don't have that frontline horse anymore. And the pitching was really what was kind of carrying Oregon State to their success. So they go 3-2 in the week. They do win their weekend. But they drop 1 just because of what Auburn did. Oregon moves up to 8 because we did have Texas A&M, who was ranked. Texas A&M was ranked 8. They slide for losing their series at home to Auburn. So a few of these teams move up a couple spots. Oregon moves up 1. Oregon goes 3-1 on the week. They beat a strong Gonzaga team at home, and then they take 2 of 3 from Washington on the road. So Oregon, I believe 8's the highest Oregon has been ranked on my top 25 all season. And once again, they find themselves right next to Oregon State, which has happened multiple times throughout my updates. Coastal Carolina moves up 1 from 10. They're up within the top 10 now. I believe it's also Coastal's highest ranking of the season for me. Coastal had that big win over North Carolina in the midweek. They win 12-2, and then they go on the road and take 2 of 3 from Georgia Southern, drop that final game of the series. But 3-1 with a win over North Carolina, it's enough to move them up. Also got Cam Flukie back in the fold in that rotation. Pitched last week against Texas State on Sunday. Had a rough start against Georgia Southern on that Sunday start, but 2 starts back, from injury. You're good to just have him back on the mound heading into the postseason. Kansas moves up to 10 from 15. Kansas just continues to put together these weeks. I think they've won their last 21 of 22 or something like that. It was a weaker schedule for Kansas this week. They go on the road and beat Wichita State in the midweek, and then they sweep Arizona at home. But they still do their job. They go 4-0, and And with teams that are really hot, I'm more likely to move them up further, like than a team that is a team like Florida who's going to lose their series one week and then win their series and then lose the series and then win the series. Like a team like that, even when they win their series, I only feel comfortable moving up one or two spots. But a team like Kansas that just keeps winning and winning and winning, I'm more comfortable just giving them a big jump up despite who they beat or how they did it. So yeah, April 17th was Kansas's last loss, and before that it was March 27th. So Kansas is probably the hottest team in the country. Yeah, I would say they're hotter than UCLA because UCLA's dropped a couple midweeks since then, I believe. So Kansas in control of that Big 12 right now. USC climbs a few spots. USC loses to UC Irvine on the road in the midweek, but then they sweep Rutgers at home, so they get to move up a couple spots. They're up to 11. I think that's the highest USC has been since they got swept out of UCLA and dropped significantly. Mississippi State, already talked about them. With Texas, they only dropped one spot. They do lose on the road at Texas, which isn't going to be a big hit regardless, just because that's the number 2 team in the country and you're on the road. They still managed to take one from that series, but they also beat Ole Miss in the midweek, so I mean, they go 2-2 in a week that they were facing top 25 teams. Ole Miss is no longer ranked, but they were ranked. They were a top 25 team headed into the week. So that's a solid resume for Mississippi State. They only dropped one. Southern Miss moves up 1-13. They sweep UL Monroe at home, lose to Tulane by 1 in the midweek. They go 3-1. That's enough for them to move up a spot. Texas A&M, they fall to 14. They took one of the biggest falls this week. They moved from 8 to 14. They did play a team ranked higher than them. Auburn was ranked 7. Texas A&M was ranked 8. But the expectation was that Texas A&M was going to win that series because they've been so good at home. And they're close enough in the rankings that it's a toss-up. And then they get beat by Auburn at home. They do go 2-2 on the week. They beat Tarleton State, who looks like a tournament team right now. They beat them at home in the midweek. But then that Friday night game against Auburn, they lose 18-5. That's pretty glaring there. And then they lose the next 2 by 1 run. So, I mean, all in all, I mean, if you take away that Friday game, it's a close series. But that Friday game is kind of glaring on the resume there. And it's like once you kind of get into that top 5, it's hard to move teams up based on what they did, in the week. I've kind of called it a logjam at the top. Texas A&M was kind of far enough away from the top that like the teams below them that did have good weeks, like that I wanted to move up, were Texas A&M was going to give way to them, which is why Texas A&M falls 6 spots. Despite losing to a team ranked higher than them. It was also at home, so it's like they do have to take a little bit bigger hit. So they fall 6 spots. I'm not worried about Texas A&M by any means. I'll get to them when we get to our Field of 64 projection, but to no surprise, I still have them hosting. West Virginia moves up 1 spot. Their midweek gets canceled, but they sweep Kansas State at home. They also have a big series coming up this week. They're going to be on the road at Kansas. That will have big Big 12 implications, and probably whoever wins that series, I would imagine. I think both teams could still host a regional, but I think Kansas winning that series, I believe, would solidify themselves as a national seed, and West Virginia winning that series would solidify them as a regional seed. So big series there. West Virginia moves up 1, go 3-0 on the week. Florida State climbs 3 spots. They had a nice bounce back week after getting swept at Stanford. They go 4-0 on the week. They beat USF 9-1 in the midweek, and then they sweep Pitt, who Pitt got onto my top 25 last week, kind of just out of nowhere. And then they turn around and get swept by Florida State. So it's kind of like, oh, thanks for coming by. Thanks for spending a week in the top 25, Pitt. And they, I'll talk about my Field of 64, but Pitt's also, not only did they climb into my top 25 and then fall out immediately, they got into my Field of 64. And spoiler alert, they're out of my Field of 64 now, based off one series. So Pitt's kind of in a weird spot where that big week they had last week was very, what would I call it? It was very, it held a lot of weight, but then unfortunately, it didn't hold enough weight for them this week. Because when you dig into some of the numbers, some of the RPI numbers and some of the records there, their resume doesn't actually look all that good. So Florida State gets to climb 3 spots because you had a few more teams ahead of them fall. One of those teams was Nebraska at 12. They had a pretty bad week. They fall all the way to 21. They're my biggest faller this week. They fall 9 spots. Nebraska goes 1-3. They beat Kansas State in their midweek, but they go on the road to Ohio State and get swept. That's not going to look good on the resume. I actually no longer have them hosting because of that. You can't really have these bad series losses later in the season because they stick out more on the resume when the committee's looking at it. So they dropped that series to Ohio State. It gets swept. So Nebraska drops 9 spots. If you look at last week's update, Florida State was that team that dropped a lot because they went on the road and got swept by an unranked opponent. So like last week, Florida State dropped 10 spots. So I kind of have to stay consistent there. You have to, if I'm going to give Florida State that big hit last week, then it's going to be the same for Nebraska this week. So Nebraska falls 9 spots. Oklahoma was the other team ranked above Florida State that fell. Oklahoma was at 18. They fall to 24. They fall 6 spots after losing a series at home to Florida. So kind of the same thing that happened to Texas A&M. Texas A&M gets beat by a top 25 team at home. Same thing with Oklahoma. They fall to Florida. So they fall 6 spots, kind of just hanging on there within the top 25. So you do have Florida move up 7 spots after beating Oklahoma on the road 2-1. They do drop that Friday night game with Aiden King on the mound. Aiden King, just like with every start, he keeps solidifying himself as the SEC Pitcher of the Year. Starts in that rotation as the Saturday starter. Liam Peterson's in that Friday night role. Big time draft prospect, and here's this sophomore in the Saturday role that takes over the Friday role and then just gets better. But then Florida loses that game with Aiden King on the mound, so it's like, can't win with your ace on the mound. How's the rest of the series going to look? And they somehow find a way to pull out the last 2 games. So Florida just continues to be an impossible team to forecast. Because, honestly, with Florida, it's like, I don't even know if they want to host because they can't win these series at home, but then they go on the road. And, they swept Arkansas on the road. Now they've got a series win over Ole Miss or Oklahoma on the road. They beat Georgia on the road. So, like I said, just an impossible team to forecast and project. Arkansas climbs 3 spots. They're at 18, right behind Florida. Arkansas is another team that got a top 25 series win. They beat Ole Miss 2-1 at home. Well, Ole Miss no longer ranked top 25, but it was a top 25 team coming into the weekend. So Arkansas gets a good bump there. And Florida was ranked below Arkansas last week, but the fact that now they've gotten close enough with Florida's series win over Oklahoma, I do kind of look back a couple weeks and say, okay, Florida swept Arkansas on the road. They probably if they're this close to each other, Florida deserves a nod over Arkansas because they do have that series sweep over Arkansas on the road. Virginia climbs a spot after a rough week last week in which they were one of the biggest fallers. It wasn't a strong week for Virginia. It was on the scoreboard. It was a strong week, but they played George Mason in the midweek and then Radford in the weekend, and they only end up playing 3 games total. But they win their week. They go undefeated on the week. That's enough for them to climb a spot, considering a couple teams above them fell. Arizona State is into the top 20. Last week was Arizona State's debut on my top 25 after kind of just lingering right on the outside all season. And so now after just 1 week, they're now inside the top 20. They had a big series win on the road at UCF. So that's another big series in the Big 12 that will have some implications down the road. Boston College is another team that takes a hit. They fall from 17 to 22. They go 2-2 on the week, but they lose a series to Clemson on the road. And if you've been following Clemson at all season, they have been a very underwhelming program all year. But Clemson tags Boston College for 2 games. So Boston College, they take a 5-spot hit. Alabama climbs back onto the top 25. Alabama has just been a funny team to rank because they started the season for me unranked. They get onto the top 25. They climb all the way to the top 10. I think the highest I might have had them was 8 at some point, and then they fell all the way off, and now they're back in my top 25. So they've had quite the roller coaster of the season. After going on the road to Tennessee, losing 2 or 3 last week, they sweep Vanderbilt at home, so that was enough to get them back onto the top 25. Oklahoma, already mentioned them, they fall 6. And then Jacksonville State is your other newcomer, because you had Pitt fall from the top 25, and then Ole Miss fell just off. Ole Miss was ranked 22, and then they lose to Arkansas on the weekend, and there just wasn't going to be enough room for them to stick on. So Jacksonville State was kind of the next team on for me. They were kind of like Arizona State was for a while. They've kind of lingered around right outside the top 25. But Jacksonville State comes away with a very nice week. Yeah, they go on the road and they beat Missouri State 2 out of 3. And Missouri State, I believe, still has the highest RPI in Conference USA. Conference USA is probably going to be a 3-bid conference this year, and Jacksonville State is leading the conference at 20-4. And so I think with one of the stronger mid-major conferences, and Jacksonville State being 38-10 on the season and 24 in that conference, it was time to rank them, considering there were 2 teams that fell out of the top 25. A couple more teams were in consideration for that final spot. Cincinnati, Michigan, Oklahoma State, NC State, Wake Forest were a couple Power Fours that I was considering there. And then I even have a larger handful of mid-majors that are still kind of in that conversation. Campbell has been there kind of all year. They've really just dominated the Coastal. Miami, Ohio is a team that has emerged for a couple weeks. Kent State, Northern Illinois. Cal Baptist is another team that's kind of hung around. UTSA has been ranked a few weeks earlier in the season. And then Mercer's up there as well as one of the best top-ranked mid-major teams. And so those teams are kind of on my bubble. So that's your top 25. Your newcomers are Jacksonville State making its top 25 debut, and Alabama returning to the top 25 at 23. And then your biggest risers, you got Kansas rising 5 spots, Florida rising 7 spots, Nebraska, your biggest faller, falling 9 spots, Boston College slid 5, Texas A&M slid 6, Oklahoma slid 6. So not too much movement at the top, but for some of the middle of the pack teams, there's a lot of movement and shuffling. So with that being said, we're going to slide over to the field of 64. So there's my updated field of 64. I had 3 changes to my regional hosts. I had 11 teams change overall. 7 of those were auto bids. We'll roll through those real quick. You had Niagara take Ryder's place in the MAAC. They're actually in a tie at the top of that conference, but Niagara takes 2 or 3 from Ryder over the weekend. So they have the head-to-head while they're in a tie atop of that conference. And with a few of these conferences, you do have a tie at the top, and it was more like case by case. I picked either the team that had the better overall, maybe the better RPI, or they just had the head-to-head. That's kind of how I decide which team gets that auto bid at the moment. So Niagara slots in over Ryder. Eastern Illinois comes into a tie with Southeast Missouri State in the Ohio Valley. Eastern Illinois, they swept Southeast Missouri over the weekend and are at 57 in the RPI. And Little Rock was the auto bid in that one a couple weeks ago on my first edition of it. And so either of those 3 teams are going to be the auto bid in that conference at the moment. It's Eastern Illinois. I gave them. They're tied with Southeast Missouri, but they have the head-to-head after that weekend sweep. So that's your new Ohio Valley bid, auto bid. Indiana State, they move into the auto bid for the Missouri Valley. They're actually tied with Murray State and UIC at that in that conference, but Indiana State has the head-to-head over UIC and also have the overall in front of Murray State. So I gave the nod to Indiana State this week. That's going to be a one bid conference. Indiana State's 134 in the RPI. Moving down from there, you had Army move into the auto bid spot over Bucknell in the Patriot. Army wins their series over Navy over the weekend. They're tied with Bucknell at the top of that conference, but have the better RPI over Bucknell and have the head-to-head over Bucknell as well. So another one bid conference there. The Patriot Army's at 158 in the RPI. So whoever wins that conference will be your tournament team there. San Diego State sweeps Nevada over the weekend. So they move into the auto bid for the Mountain West. Nevada was your auto bid last week. And then you also have Air Force half a game back in that conference as well. So something to keep an eye on, because that's also going to be another one big conference. Winthrop and High Point just kind of keep trading trading places in the Big South. Winthrop moves into that auto bid. Last week, I believe one of these weeks I had the Big South as a two bid conference because both Winthrop and High Point's RPI was high enough where I was like I could fit both of them in. But this week it's just Winthrop because High Point's RPI falls to 53. So right now that looks like a one bid conference as well. Winthrop they have a 1 game lead over High Point, and that's going to be your big mid-major series of the weekend because Winthrop's going to be going to High Point over the weekend. And then the final auto bid is St. John's. They are now the auto bid out of the Big East over Creighton. Creighton was your Big East auto bid last week. Both those teams are tied at the top of the Big East. Creighton has the better overall, but I gave the nod to St. John's because they have the head-to-head over Creighton because they took 2 of 3 from Creighton over the weekend. And then also keep an eye on Xavier and UConn, 1 game back in that conference. So that's your changes in terms of auto bids. And then your 4 teams, the 4 at-larges that got in are Kentucky, NC State, Virginia Tech, and Cincinnati. Your 4 teams that fall out are TCU, UAB, Pitt, and Cal Baptist. Cincinnati was really the main one I wanted to get in because honestly, last week I think I just really dropped the ball on leaving Cincinnati out. So they're in as a 2 seed in the Atlanta Regional on my field of 64, which would put them in that 25 to 30 range in the ranking, which I feel is right now. Right now they're 22 in the RPI, have 10 quad 1 wins, so that feels right. 13 and 11 in the Big 12. And then Kentucky gets that series win over Tennessee. They're back-to-back in the RPI. Tennessee's 34 in the RPI. Kentucky's 35. So I have both of them as 3 seeds. Kentucky gets into the Morgantown Regional, West Virginia, who's a new regional host for me. And Tennessee slides over to the Conway Regional as a 3 seed. NC State moves up to 37 in the RPI. Virginia Tech and NC State both get in, and both of those were teams that were kind of adamant about leaving out last week. Like there wasn't really a conversation for me to get them in, but they both come away with pretty good weeks. I mean, NC State, they beat East Carolina in the midweek, and then they take 2 or 3 from Miami at home over the weekend. So that looks good on the resume. They're sitting at 37 in the RPI, 7 quad 1 wins, and 13 and 14 in the ACC. So they're kind of at that 13 win threshold, which, I mean, the 13 win threshold is more applicable to the SEC, I would say, but the ACC is not far behind. NC State 12 and 12 in the ACC. So, I mean, they have one more win. I mean, if they end up 500 in the ACC when it's all said and done, which could certainly happen. They're at Stanford this weekend, and then they're at home versus North Carolina. So I mean, it's perfectly feasible that they could sweep Stanford and then get swept by North Carolina, or take 2 or 3 from Stanford, lose 2 or 3 from North Carolina. So I feel pretty confident that they're going to finish the season 500 in the ACC, which that'll be enough for them to get in. Especially like when I'm trying to slot in my last 4 teams, I'm really having a hard time finding like a truly deserving team, in my opinion, to get in. And so I think like teams like NC State and Virginia Tech, who are kind of like fringe tournament teams in the ACC, they might just kind of slide in by default. Virginia Tech's 13 and 14 in the ACC, and they got Clemson to close out their season in 2 weeks, and that's a series that, I mean, it's at home, so I believe they could take 2 or 3 in that series and finish the ACC season 15 and 15. And they're right above NC State there in the RPI at 36. TCU falls out. TCU is all the way down at 50 in the RPI. Only got 3 quad 1 wins. 88 in non-conference strength of schedule. UAB was kind of an odd man out here. They dropped to 46 in the RPI, 12 and 9 in the American. I'm not sure that's gonna be enough to get it done, depending on how the rest of their season shakes out. But as of right now, I didn't feel super confident keeping them in because they were in last week. Pitt, I kind of discussed them in the top 25. They had a really good week to get them in the conversation, and then had a bad week to get out of the conversation. Yeah, and Pitt's right there with TCU at 49 in the RPI. 10 and 14 in the ACC. So That's kind of a tough hill to climb there. They got to go on the road to North Carolina this weekend, and then they got Notre Dame at home. But I mean, if you go on the road and get swept at North Carolina, or even lose 2 or 3, you're looking at 11-16 record. Which I mean, then you kind of have to sweep Notre Dame to really have a shot at making the tournament. So they fall out. And then Cal Baptist was kind of another team that was kind of an odd man out. They're down at 65 in the RPI. Overall at 37-11. It's like I think they're probably going to end up with the best record that gets left out because they're in the Western where Tarleton State leads that conference. Tarleton State's 58 in the RPI, Cal Baptist 63. So I don't see that being a conference that gets an at-large. And as of now, Tarleton State's in line to win that conference. Cal Baptist certainly still could win that conference. And get into the tournament. But I just don't see them being an at-large. There's just not enough there for me to feel confident about giving them an at-large bid. They've only got one Quad 1 win, 266 in non-conference strength of schedule. And there isn't really anything on the schedule there that's like really going to boost their RPI. They got Cal State Northridge in a midweek. Then they got Sacramento State over the weekend. UC Davis to close the season. And then really their only tournament team on the schedule is UC Santa Barbara on the road in a midweek before the final weekend. So Cal Baptist kind of gets left out. My regional host changes. West Virginia slots in as a regional host. They're at the 16 seed. Florida State gets in as a 15 seed. And Mississippi State, this is the first time I've put them as a regional host. Florida State's all the way up there at 7 in the RPI. I don't like their Quad 1 record at 5-9. But they also have the 5th best strength of schedule, 15-9 in the ACC. They could come away with I would consider them maybe not a sleeper to win the ACC, but it's like I think there's certainly a world in where they beat a Georgia Tech or a North Carolina to win the ACC tournament, and then you kind of have to give them a regional hosting spot there. Mississippi State at 9 in the RPI. 9-9 in Quad 1, and then West Virginia after a solid weekend. They're 25 in the RPI, but I felt like the Big 12 should get one more regional bid or regional host outside Kansas, and West Virginia was kind of the one that I felt confident giving that one to. Your teams that fell out of hosting were Nebraska after the tough week they had, Oregon State. Oregon State was more of like, I don't know what to really expect from them now, especially now that Dax Whitney's out. So I have Oregon State as one of the higher 2 seeds. Same thing with Boston College and Nebraska. I still feel confident about all these teams being in the high 2 seeds. Nebraska's 18 in the RPI, Boston College at 24. And then Oregon State at 15. Oregon State, another thing there is, I mean, they've only played 4 Quad 1 games or 2-2 there. So those are your 3 teams that fall out. As far as national seeding goes, Florida they climb back into a national seed as the 8th seed. The reason being they have the most Quad 1 wins in the country at 15-11. Despite the fact that Florida is like just a very bipolar team, so to speak, they have the most wins. They have the most Quad 1 wins in the country at 15-11. Second in strength of schedule, and they're still 31-17 overall. Probably will still go over 500 in the SEC. Kind of had to give them a national seed there, and then I think that was the only hosting changes I made. Jacksonville State still in there as a regional host. Alabama, I was kind of scared about that last week. The fact that I kept Alabama in as a regional seed, despite the fact that they were sub 500 in the SEC and unranked. They gave them to them anyway, and with their series sweep over Vanderbilt, that looks a lot better. So not much else changed outside of that. A few of these regional quads here just stay completely the same. Like your UCLA regional, same 4 teams in there. I just swapped UC Santa Barbara and Gonzaga. UC Santa Barbara, I think, moved back into the top 32 in the RPI. So I feel confident them being kind of like the lowest ranked 2 seed. And then Gonzaga, I believe they lost their weekend, so they kind of fall right outside of that. So they are 3 seed now. I'd say my favorite regional I put together here is maybe that College Station regional. Actually, that was that was the team that fell out of the top 8 was Texas A&M. I slotted them in right at 9 here. In the seeding, they are 8th in the RPI, 12 quad 1 wins, but 24th in strength of schedule and 178 in non-conference strength of schedule. And so coming off that home series loss, they kind of just miss out on the top 8 there. Kansas is the other team that slid into the top 8, and then Coastal kind of ended up being the odd man out there. Kansas, I mean, just the way they've been playing, the way they're dominating the Big 12, and just that overall resume just looks too good to leave them outside the top 8. And so Coastal is kind of the odd man out there. And then, like I already talked about, Texas A&M falls out to give way to Florida. But that College Station regional, I think that might be my favorite regional I put together. You got USC in there, who's top. I mean, USC is top 10 in the RPI right now. So, I mean, there is a case for them to host, but they also have 0 quad 1 wins. They're 0-8 in quad 1. So it's like they've kind of beat up on bad teams and then really got outmatched by teams on their level. So I didn't feel confident about giving USC a hosting spot. So they slot into that College Station regional. And then Oklahoma State, who's a sneaky team that's kind of been surging a little bit. And so they're in that regional. And then the Coastal Carolina regional is another one I really like as well. You got Virginia in there, who, I mean, if they put together a solid final 2 weeks, there's a conversation for them to host. And then Tennessee, who's, not the Tennessee of old, but certainly a team that could get hot at the right time and make an Omaha run for what it's worth. So that could be a pretty competitive regional there. And then Oregon State and Kansas, they're in the Lawrence regional with Kansas at the 7 seed. Could envision that being, a fun championship game there. And then that Morgantown regional, West Virginia, you got 3 Power 4 teams in there, West Virginia, Oregon, and Kentucky. And then Campbell, who, I already talked about in my top 25 as a team that's just kind of dominated all year. Not an auto bid to take lightly by any means. So that could be one of the more competitive regionals there, which it really should be since that's the 16 seed regional. So that's kind of like your highest ranked 2 seed, which is Oregon, which Oregon also has a case to be made to host, but they're kind of like an odd man out there as well. Yeah, Oregon's at 27 in the RPI, and you already got a Big Ten team represented with UCLA there. And I don't know if the Big Ten is going to be a conference worthy of getting multiple regional bids or regional hosting bids, but I mean, there's still certainly a case for Oregon there and USC for that matter. But UCLA is really the only Big Ten team I'm giving a regional to at the moment. So yeah, I mean, there's your field of 64. Like I did my last 2 videos, I'll leave a link down there at the bottom so you can go make your own field of 64 over there on 11.7. Leave a link down there to the top 25 as well, so you can go check that out for yourself. And then just check out the website, college baseball stuff, prospects. This video will be out Tuesday morning or Monday night, but you'll probably be watching this Tuesday. And then the plan is to have my first MLB draft board video out on Wednesday, kind of just going over my top 75, what it is at the moment. I said last week to look out for that, but just still look out for that. Should be out here in the next couple days or so. So, yeah, top 25, field of 64. Got 2 weeks left of regular season college baseball in the Power 4. Like I said, some conferences have already finished, and before we know it, conference tournaments will be going, and then we'll have regionals, super regionals, World Series. So, just continue to tune in here. I'll be trying to drop in every week to, update top 25, the field of 64. Talk postseason. Don't really have a name for what this is yet. It's just really the baseball-focused YouTube channel where I pop in here and talk about my updates. So, yeah, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you in the next one.